The Sawtooth Mountains rose black against a bruised October sky. Wind came down off the high pass in a long, low sound, moving through 10,000 acres of lodgepole pine that had never once been quiet in the memory of any living soul. A cabin stood on the shoulder of the mountain, log walls the color of old honey, a blue thread of smoke lifting straight from the stone chimney, a porch that faced south into a meadow gone brown with autumn. Inside, a lamp burned low above a long table, 4 tin cups, 4 rifles on the rack by the door, 4 brothers who had not yet learned that the wagon coming up the valley road below was carrying a woman in a navy blue traveling dress, a leather trunk, a mother's Bible, and a letter that had been signed with the eldest brother's name by a hand that was not his. The wagon climbed, the wind moved through the pines, and nobody on that porch knew yet. Rain came sideways off the Sawtooth Peaks that October evening. The kind of rain that finds every crack in a cabin, every seam in a coat, every old wound a man thought he had forgiven himself for. Absalom Youngblood was not asleep. I was in the parlor of a house that did not exist anymore. The Ridgway house in Boise. Autumn. Only that was wrong. There was no Ridgway house in Boise. There was only a colonel in a blue coat and rain on the pines and the smell of horses that had been ridden too hard. Absalom, sir. The East Ridge, boy. You see that line of scree? I see it, sir. You are looking at the line. You are not looking at the tracks below it. There are no tracks below it, sir. Colonel Bartram Ridgway was 57 years old, gray at the temples, gray in the mustache, gray in the eyes that had watched 3 sons die in 3 separate wars. Absalom, there are always tracks. Absalom bent lower over the map. It was a map, and that was the moment when the sound came. It came from the timber above them. It came from all sides. It came from a man who was not supposed to know they were there. The colonel turned his head. He looked at Absalom. He said very quietly, "Boy, you go tell my daughter I am sorry." Then the timber lit up with muzzle flashes. Absalom sat up. The bed was cold. His shirt was wet clean through. The rain was still hammering the shakes above his head. The wind was still moving through the pines beyond the window. Somewhere in the yard a horse stamped, uneasy. He put his face in his hands. 2 years. 2 years and 2 months and 4 days. That was how long the dream had been coming. Some nights every night, some nights only Sundays. He had not asked his brothers whether they heard him wake because he did not want the answer. Downstairs, someone was already at the stove, because someone was always already at the stove. That was the shape of the Youngblood cabin. 4 brothers, 1 long room below, 2 lofts above, a porch that faced south into the Sawtooth Basin, and a barn that had been built the summer the old man died. His father, Ephraim Youngblood, dead now these 7 years and buried under the tall pine at the edge of the meadow. Absalom pulled on his boots. He went down the ladder. Merrick was at the stove. Coffee, bacon, a cast-iron skillet the color of a river stone. He did not look up. "You was talking again, brother." "I know it. You want to talk about it?" "No." "All right, then." Merrick Youngblood did not press. He never pressed. That was maybe the reason his hair was still black at 38, while Absalom's had gone gray at the temples before his 40th birthday. Merrick could carry a thing without wearing it. Absalom carried things until they wore him down to the wood. Coffee. The smell of it filled the cabin. Bitter, deep, old. The kind of coffee a man drinks when he has 40 miles of high country ahead of him and no time for delicate feelings about the taste. Absalom took his tin cup. He walked to the window. The rain was letting up. First light coming pale over the eastern ridge. The pines dripping. The wind carrying the smell of wet pine bark and horse. Merrick spoke over his shoulder. "Ferdinand is at the forge." "I hear him." The distant ring of iron on iron. The forge behind the barn. Ferdinand was probably shoeing something. Ferdinand was always shoeing something. If there was nothing to shoe, Ferdinand invented reasons. Jasper. "Not back yet." Absalom set his cup down slow. "Not back yet. He rode down to Elk Basin yesterday for lamp oil in the mail. Was fixin' to stop at the Widow Fairfax's for that book she promised me. He'll be back before noon. Brother, Don't get to worrying. Absalom did not answer. Because Absalom was already worrying. Because Absalom was the one who worried. It was not a job you could hand off. It was a job the eldest son took whether he wanted it or not. And Ephraim Youngblood had raised him to take it. And now the old man was dead, and Absalom took it. He turned from the window. Merrick. Yeah. When Jasper gets back, you send him up to me. I will. Outside, the wind moved. Outside, the ring of iron on iron went on. Outside, 32 miles down the mountain and one river valley over, a young woman in a navy blue traveling dress had just climbed down from the last stage of a 2,000-mile journey she had spent 19 days making. Her boots hit the mud of Elk Basin, Idaho Territory. She looked up at the false front buildings. She looked down at her boots. She said very quietly, to no one at all, Papa, I hope you know what you are doing bringing me here. Elk Basin, Idaho Territory, October the 15th, 1878. Population, 141 souls. A general store, a livery, a saloon that also served as the town hall on Tuesdays, a Methodist church that had been raised in 1868 by the hands of every man in the valley, whether he was Methodist or not, a stage stop that was really just the wide covered porch of the livery, and one girl, standing in mud up to the ankles of her Boston boots, holding a leather trunk in both white-knuckled hands. Her name was Evangeline Ridgway. She was 22 years old. She had a heart-shaped face and porcelain skin and honey-blonde hair that had come uncoiled from its bun somewhere around the last change of horses at Silver City. She had large, expressive green eyes that were, at the moment, doing their level best not to fill with water. She was cold. She was tired. She was afraid. She was also, and she would have died before admitting it aloud, quite hungry. The driver of the stage set her carpetbag down beside her. Miss? Yes. You reckon somebody's coming for you? I do believe so. You want I should wait a spell. She looked at the empty street. She looked at the low gray sky. She looked at the driver. Sir, you have been most kind, but I do not wish to hold up your onward journey. I am certain the arrangements will be attended to shortly. He tipped his hat. He climbed up. He clucked to his team, and the stage went rattling away down the main street of Elk Basin, throwing up mud from 6 turning wheels. She stood there. She counted to 20. She counted to 50. She counted to 100. Nobody came, because the letter had said Absalom Youngblood would meet her at the stage stop. Because the letter was, though she did not yet know it, a fiction. She set her trunk down on the porch boards. She smoothed her skirt with her palms. She lifted her chin the way her Aunt Cordelia in Boston had taught her to lift her chin when she was 14, and had first learned that a woman without a man in the room must stand as if she were her own regiment. She walked into the livery. The smell hit her first. Horse, straw, manure, oil, the particular sharp musk of a working stable that no Boston livery had ever smelled quite like. It made her eyes water. A boy was mucking out the third stall. He was young, 19 at the outside, skinny, ink-dark hair falling into his eyes. He looked up when she came in, and he stopped what he was doing so completely he might have been struck by lightning. Ma'am. Good afternoon. Ma'am, I am seeking Captain Absalom Youngblood. I was given to understand he would meet the stage. The boy dropped the pitchfork. Not dropped in the sense of, set it down. Dropped in the sense of it fell out of his hand and made a clang against the flagstone and rolled toward her boot. And she stepped back and he flinched, and she did not know why he had flinched. Ma'am, he ain't here. So I gathered. I mean, he ain't been in town today, nor yesterday. I see. Ma'am, are you the... He could not seem to finish the sentence. He was looking at her face the way a man might look at a ghost he had heard about all his life and had never expected to actually meet. She held out the letter, small hand, trembling only slightly. I am Miss Evangeline Ridgway. I have come at the invitation of Captain Youngblood. I have his letter here if that is of any assistance. The boy did not take the letter. He stared at her. Then a voice came from the doorway. Land's sakes, child, put that letter away before the wind takes it. Evangeline turned. An old woman stood in the doorway of the livery. 68 if she was a day. Iron gray hair coiled up under a plain black bonnet. wire-rimmed spectacles catching the pale afternoon light. She was small. She was straight-backed as a schoolmarm. She was leaning slightly on a hickory walking stick, and she was studying Evangeline with pale gray eyes that seemed to see clean through the traveling dress and the 2,000 miles of dust and the polite Boston posture right down into the small, tired, frightened girl underneath. "Ma'am, come with me, child. I beg your pardon. Come with me, child. That boy yonder is not fit company for a lady, and you are catching your death in that wet dress. Ledger, you get your pitchfork. You have not seen this young lady. You do not know she come. You will oblige me by holding your tongue on the matter until I say otherwise. Are we understood?" The boy Ledger nodded. "Fast. Too fast. Yes, Miss Wilhelmina. Good. Come, child." Evangeline picked up her carpet bag. She left her trunk on the porch because the small woman was already walking away with the brisk determination of someone who did not waste steps. And Evangeline had learned, in the last 19 days, that when someone offered you help in a strange country, you took it without asking questions until you were somewhere warm. They crossed the muddy street. They passed the saloon. They came to a small white clapboard house set back from the road behind a picket fence, gone gray with weather. A signboard hanging by the gate said, in careful painted letters, "Fairfax, library and schoolroom, visitors by appointment." The old woman opened the gate. She held it. Evangeline stepped through. At the porch step, the old woman stopped. She turned. She looked at Evangeline again, longer this time. She reached up. She touched Evangeline's cheek, very light, the way a woman touches a photograph she has been carrying in a locket for a long time. "Child." "Yes, ma'am. You look just exactly like your mother did the day she got off that same stagecoach." Evangeline stopped breathing. "Ma'am, my mother has never been to Idaho Territory." The old woman smiled. It was small. It was tired. It was, more than anything else, patient. "Child, your mother was in this town for 6 weeks in the spring of 1856. Before you were born, before your father was Colonel Ridgway, when he was still Lieutenant Ridgway of the Territorial Volunteers, and she was Miss Amelia Coates of Providence, Rhode Island, and she was 20 years old, and she wore a dress the same navy blue as the one you are wearing right now, because your mother, my dear, was my niece, and you are my great-niece, and I have been waiting for you to walk into that livery for a very long time." Evangeline's carpet bag hit the porch boards. She did not remember letting go of the handle. 2 hours later, a wagon, Ledger Everhart on the box, the old woman Wilhelmina Fairfax, who was also, apparently, Evangeline's great-aunt on her mother's side beside him. Evangeline in the bed of the wagon, tucked under a bearskin robe that smelled of wood smoke and cedar, and something Evangeline could not name that seemed very old and very kind. The rain had stopped. The sun had come out from behind the ridge, slanting low, golden. The road climbed, aspens along the way, golden rust, shivering. The kind of gold that looks like a coin someone spent his last one on. Ledger did not speak. Wilhelmina spoke enough for all three of them. "You must understand, child. I never expected you to come. I sent no letter. I made no arrangement. When the boy came into my library last week with a piece of paper in his hand and said, 'Miss Wilhelmina, do you reckon this letter to be in a proper hand for a lady to receive?' I looked at it and I saw the signature Absalom Youngblood, and I did not know what to make of it. Because Absalom Youngblood has not written a letter to a woman in 8 years. Because his wife has been in the ground 8 years. And Absalom does not write letters to women who are alive." "Ma'am." "Yes, child. Are you saying the letter is—" "I am saying, child, that the letter that brought you here was not written by the man whose name is signed at the bottom of it. Someone forged that signature. And I do not know who, and I do not know why. And I am fixin' to find out this afternoon, or I shall know the reason." Evangeline pressed her palms together in her lap. Her hands were cold clean through. "Ma'am, I have traveled 2,000 miles. I know it, child. On the assurance of that letter. I know it. If the letter was forged, if nobody in Elk Basin— Child, hush. Nobody is sending you back tonight. Nobody is sending you back this week. Nobody may be sending you back at all, but we are going to that cabin, and we are going to look Captain Absalom Youngblood in the eye, and we are going to see what manner of man he is. Because I have known him 7 years, and my late husband knew his father 20 years before that. And if that man had a hand in bringing you here under false pretense, I shall eat this bonnet without benefit of salt. So sit tight. Say nothing. Let me speak first. Are we understood? Yes, ma'am. The wagon climbed on. Evangeline held her mother's Bible against her chest. It was a small book, leather-bound, worn soft at the corners. She had not opened it in 3 days. She had not needed to. She could feel her mother in it just from holding it. The cabin came into view. It sat on a shoulder of the mountain, back against the pines. Log walls the color of honey where the last sun caught them. Blue smoke lifting straight up from the stone chimney. A long, low porch that looked south across a meadow gone brown with autumn. A barn behind. A forge behind the barn. Its bellows silent now. Its coals winking red in the fading light. 4 men stood on the porch. They stood as if they had been standing there a while. Because the sound of the wagon had carried up the valley long before the wagon itself. Ledger drew rein. The horses blew. Nobody on the porch moved. Nobody in the wagon moved either. Then the tallest of the 4 men on the porch, the one with gray at his temples and a scar running down from below his left ear into the collar of his flannel shirt. That man came down the steps. Slow, deliberate. Both hands where the widow Fairfax and the boy on the box could see them. He stopped at the wagon's tail. He looked at Wilhelmina. He looked at Ledger. He did not look at Evangeline. He was, in fact, most carefully not looking at Evangeline. Miss Wilhelmina. Absalom. You brung company. I brung company. You gonna tell me who? I am fixin' to. Come around this side. Help me down. My knees ain't what they was. Absalom Youngblood came around the wagon. He offered a hand. Wilhelmina took it. She climbed down with the slow, patient care of a woman who has learned that a broken hip at 68 is a death sentence and is not planning to die yet. She patted his hand when she reached the ground. There's a good boy. Ma'am. Now. She turned. She stepped aside. She did not look at Evangeline. She looked at Absalom. Absalom, kindly help the young lady down. Absalom Youngblood turned. Finally. Slow. His gray eyes lifted. And he saw her. He saw the honey blonde hair, the porcelain skin, the navy blue traveling dress with its small brooch at the throat, the Bible clutched against her chest. And he saw her eyes. Green, the exact, particular, unmistakable green of Colonel Bartram Ridgway of Boise, Idaho Territory, who had died at Rattlesnake Ridge on the 11th of August in the year of our Lord 1876. Absalom Youngblood made no sound, but his right hand, which had been perfectly steady up to that moment, began very slightly to shake. Behind him on the porch, one of the other 3 men, the tall one, the one with the red beard, said very quietly, "Oh, Lord." The one beside him, black hair, blue eyes, the one holding a book with his finger marking his place, closed the book. The youngest one, the one with the pale beard and the green eyes, took 1 step backward, as though he had already understood something the others had not yet caught up to. Wilhelmina Fairfax planted her hickory stick. Absalom Youngblood. Ma'am, this is Miss Evangeline Ridgway of Boston, Massachusetts. She is the only living daughter of the late Colonel Bartram Ridgway of the Idaho Territorial Volunteers. She has traveled 19 days by rail and stagecoach to arrive at your cabin this afternoon. In her possession is a letter, signed with your name, requesting her hand in marriage. Absalom Youngblood took his hat off. Slowly. Ma'am. Well, ma'am, I did not write that letter. I did not think you had. I have never in my life sent for a mail-order bride. I would not know how. I would not. He stopped. His voice had gone tight. He looked at Evangeline, for the first time, directly. Those gray eyes on those green eyes and the wind moving through the pines around them, and somewhere up the valley a raven calling once, twice, and then falling silent. He said very low, "Miss Ridgway." "Sir, I knew your father." "Yes, sir. He spoke of you often, in his letters." Absalom cleared his throat. He was a fine man. He was the finest man I ever knew, and I owe him a debt I have not paid, and I will not have his daughter standing in my yard in a wet dress at sundown. Ma'am, he turned to Wilhelmina. Ma'am, I do not know what has happened here. I do not know who wrote that letter. But this young lady is under my roof tonight, and she is under my roof for however long it takes to sort this business out. On that you have my word. Wilhelmina Fairfax nodded once. That is what I come to hear you say, son. She turned to Evangeline. Down you come, my dear. There is coffee on inside. There is stew in the pot. There are 4 grown men on that porch who are not going to know what to do with themselves for the next hour, and it will be highly entertaining to watch. Evangeline let out a breath she had been holding since Silver City. She took Absalom's offered hand. His hand was warm. It was rough as pine bark. It was more than anything else. Steady. The tremor had gone. He had put it away somewhere. She did not know where. He handed her down. Her boot touched the mud of the Youngblood yard. She looked up. She was very small. He was very tall. There was a full head and a half between them. She said quietly, Captain Youngblood. Ma'am, thank you. He did not answer. He simply nodded. And then he turned to the men on the porch and he said, one word, in the voice of a man who has been an elder brother for so long, he does not know how not to be boys. They came off the porch together. The red-bearded one, Ferdinand, reached for her trunk. Ma'am, allow me. The black-haired one, Merrick, offered her his arm. Careful of the step, ma'am. It's slick. The pale-bearded one, Jasper, did not come down at all. He stood on the top step of the porch. I watched her cross the yard with his 3 brothers around her. And when she looked up, only for a second, only because she could feel his eyes on her, she saw that his face was very white, and his hands were pressed flat against the porch rail as if he were holding himself upright. She did not know why. She did not know him. Not yet. That night the cabin was warm. Stew on the table, venison and root vegetables, and the good bite of black pepper and something Merrick called ramps that he had pulled up from the edge of the creek in the spring and dried. Cornbread, coffee, a jar of wild plum preserves that Wilhelmina had brought up from town in the wagon. Evangeline ate, not much, but enough, because she was, at last, warm, warm on the inside, warm on the outside. The rough table under her hands was smooth with years of scrubbing. The lamp above the table cast everything in honey light. 4 men sat around the table with her and the widow Fairfax at the head, and nobody asked her a single question about the letter, or her father, or her mother, or Boston, or the 2,000 miles she had come. They ate, they passed the cornbread. Ferdinand asked Wilhelmina about the pastor's rheumatism. Merrick asked her about a book he had ordered through her that had not come yet. Jasper, silent Jasper, the youngest, the one whose face had gone white on the porch, Jasper did not speak at all. Absalom sat at the head of the table opposite Wilhelmina. He ate slow. He did not look at Evangeline. Not once. Not through the whole meal. She noticed. She did not know why it hurt a little. She told herself it did not. She was wrong. After dinner, Wilhelmina stood. Boys, I am fixin' to bed down in the spare room. Miss Ridgway will take the loft above. Ledger will sleep in the barn with the horses. Absalom. Ma'am, you look like a man who has been sat on his own porch all day trying to figure out what he done. You have not done anything. Go outside. Look at the stars. They will tell you what your own head cannot. He nodded once. He rose. I took his coat from the peg by the door. He walked out. The door closed soft behind him. Wilhelmina looked at Evangeline. Child, you have been most brave today. Sleep now. Tomorrow we sort the rest. Ferdinand, kindly show Miss Ridgway the loft. Ma'am? Ferdinand, the red-bearded one, the one with the biggest hands and the softest voice, led her to the ladder. He held the lamp for her while she climbed. He handed the lamp up. He said, Ma'am, if you need aught in the night, there is a small bell on that shelf yonder. You ring her. One of us will come. Thank you, Mr. Youngblood. Ferdinand, ma'am, if it please you, there is 4 of us. Mr. Youngblood gets confusing. She smiled, for the first time in 19 days. Ferdinand, then, good night. Ma'am, He went down. His boots thumped soft on the pine floor. The lamp in the room below dimmed. The cabin settled into that particular deep quiet that only wooden houses in high country reach after nightfall, a quiet made of logs shifting in the cold, and coals sighing in the stove, and the wind moving in the pines outside, and a horse somewhere in the barn stamping and settling and stamping and settling. Evangeline lay down. She did not sleep. She lay very still, and she looked at the pattern of lamplight through the cracks in the loft floor. And she listened, and she thought about Captain Absalom Youngblood, who had not looked at her once through the entire meal. And she thought about the pale-bearded young man on the porch, whose face had gone white when he saw her. And she thought about her father. And she thought about a letter signed with the wrong hand. And she thought about Wilhelmina Fairfax's words on the wagon. "We are going to see what manner of man he is." She had seen. He was a man who had spoken of her father as the finest man he had ever known, and whose hand had shaken when he first looked at her, and who had not looked at her again. She turned her face to the wall. Below, outside, on the porch, Absalom Youngblood sat on the top step of his own cabin with his coat pulled tight against the cold. He was not looking at the stars. I was looking at a small hardbound book he had not opened in 2 years. The field journal Colonel Bartram Ridgway. His widow had sent it by post 9 months after Rattlesnake Ridge. There had been a note. "Absalom, he would have wanted you to have this. It was in his saddlebag when they brought him home to me. He carried it every day of his service." The widow's name had been Amelia. She had died herself 6 months later. Of grief, they said, of a broken heart. Evangeline had been 18 years old when her mother died. Absalom had known this. He had known it, and he had not written. He had told himself he would write when he could face it. He had told himself he would write when he stopped waking up wet with sweat at 3 in the morning. He had not written. And now the daughter of the finest man he had ever known was asleep in the loft above his own kitchen, because of a letter he had not written. He opened the field journal. His fingers were steady now. He would not let them shake now. He turned to the last written page. The colonel's small, tight handwriting, the particular disciplined script of a man who had learned to write in a rucksack because paper was heavy. "If I do not come back from this expedition, I ask whoever finds this to see the following affairs to their proper end. First, my daughter Evangeline is my only living child. See to it, if you are able, that she knows the truth of what happened at Rattlesnake Ridge. She will bear the weight of the truth better than she will bear the ignorance of it. Second, there is a man named Zephaniah Kingsley who has been buying up land in the Elk Basin holdings under false pretense for the past several years. I have documentation. It is filed with my Boston attorney, Mr. Whitcomb, in a strongbox with instructions to open only on my confirmed death. You will find the man Kingsley has purchased more than the land. He has purchased silence. He has purchased at least one federal officer to my certain knowledge, and I suspect he has purchased more. I go tomorrow to confirm the last piece of what I know. If I do not return, take Kingsley to a court of law. Do not shoot him. Do not confront him alone. A court, in front of God and country. That is the only way the disease is cut out. Third, bury me at Elk Basin, not Boston. My people are in Elk Basin. My daughter will understand. Fourth, Absalom, if you are the one reading this, it is not your fault. The line of scree above the East Ridge was mine to read too. I read it. I chose the mission anyway. I chose it knowing. Do not carry that weight for me. Carry my daughter instead if she should ever have need of a carrying. That is all I ask. It is enough. Your friend to the end of the country. Bartram Ridgway, Rattlesnake Ridge, August 10, 1876. Absalom, Youngblood, sat on the porch of his own cabin for a very long time. The stars came out. The wind moved. Somewhere up the mountain a wolf sang 2 notes and stopped. He closed the journal. He wiped his face on his sleeve. He said out loud, to no one at all, "Colonel, I hear you." Then he got up, and he went inside, and he did not sleep either. Morning. The Youngblood cabin at first light. Coffee, bacon, the good clean bite of cold mountain air coming in through the open door where Merrick was chopping kindling on the porch. Evangeline came down the ladder. She wore the same navy blue traveling dress. It had dried by the stove overnight. She had washed her face in the basin. She had done her hair up again. She looked, if a person looked closely, like a woman who had not slept. Absalom was at the table. He rose when she came in. "Ma'am." "Sir." Ferdinand pulled her chair out. Merrick brought coffee. Jasper was not in the cabin at all. "Mr. Jasper Youngblood is out yonder, ma'am," Ferdinand said, as if reading her thought. "Chopping firewood. He rose early." "I see." She did not press it. She sat. She took the coffee. She looked at Absalom over the rim of the tin cup. She said, quiet enough that only he heard, "Captain Youngblood, may I speak with you a moment before breakfast?" He nodded. He rose. I held the door for her. They stepped out onto the porch. The morning was cold. Her breath fogged. She wrapped her arms around herself. He noticed. Without a word, he took off his coat and put it over her shoulders. It was warm from him. It smelled of wood smoke and horse and something faintly like cedar oil. She did not say thank you. She did not know why she did not. She said, "Captain Youngblood, last night at supper you did not look at me. Not once. I would like to know why." He looked at her now. Straight. Those gray eyes on those green eyes. He said, "Ma'am, I could not." I gathered as much. "I would like to know why." "You have your father's eyes, ma'am." "Yes, I know it. I let your father die." She stopped breathing. He did not. He kept going, because now he had started, and he had to finish, and he did not think he would ever have the courage to start again if he stopped now. "I was his junior officer at Rattlesnake Ridge. I saw a line of scree above the east ridge that did not sit right. I mentioned it to him. He mentioned it back to me. I let him go into that pass because we was on the clock, and I was young, and I thought the schedule mattered more than a bad feeling. He was killed 40 minutes later. I lived. 3 of my sergeants did not, and your father did not. And I have been carrying that weight for 2 years and 2 months and 5 days. And when you got down from that wagon yesterday with his eyes in your face, I could not look at you because I did not know how to look at you and still keep breathing. That is your answer. Ma'am, it is not a good answer, but it is the true one." The morning wind moved through the aspens along the west fence line. The aspens shivered. Somewhere in the meadow below the cabin, an elk called once. Long, mournful. Evangeline looked down at her hands. She looked up again. She said, very level, very Boston, very much her mother's daughter, "Captain Youngblood, my father wrote to my mother about you 11 times. I have read every letter. He said you were the smartest young officer he had ever trained. He said you were the only man in his company who could read a map like the terrain owed him money. He said if he ever had a son, he would want that son to be you. He said this in a letter dated the 3rd of August, 1876. She paused. 8 days before he died. Absalom's throat worked. He said in his last letter to my mother, sent on the 9th of August, that he was going into the field the next morning on a matter he did not fully understand yet. He said, "Bam," and I am able to quote him precisely because I have read that letter 117 times. He said, "Amelia, if I do not come back from this, tell Absalom Youngblood it was not his weight to carry. Tell him I chose this. Tell him I chose to go knowing. Tell him to carry my Evangeline if she should ever need a carrying. That is all I ask of him. That is enough." Absalom Youngblood put his hand on the porch rail. He held onto the rail. He did not turn away, but his eyes closed once, tight, and he stood very still for the length of time it takes an elk in a low meadow to finish calling and start again. She said, quieter still, "My father did not blame you, sir. My mother did not blame you. I do not blame you. If you have been carrying my father's death for 2 years and 2 months and 5 days. Sir, you have been carrying a thing that was never yours to carry, and I would ask you, respectfully, to set it down." He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice was low and rough. "Ma'am, sir, you are a good deal like him. I have been told so. He would be proud of you. I hope so, sir." He turned to face her. The morning light was on his face now. She could see the lines of it, the gray in the temple, the scar down the jaw, the tired, steady kindness under the tired, steady grief. He said, "Miss Ridgway, sir, I do not know who wrote that letter that brought you here. I mean to find out, but I want you to hear this from my own mouth. Whatever brought you here, However you got here, you are welcome under this roof, as long as you have need of it. My brothers and I will see no harm come to you. That is a promise. In the memory of your father, and on my life. Do you understand me? I understand you, Captain. Absalom, ma'am. If it please you, I have 3 brothers and Mr. Youngblood gets confusing. She almost smiled. She caught it. She let it out anyway. Absalom, then, and I am Evangeline, since apparently we have set aside the formalities. Evangeline, he said it once, careful, like a man who has been given a piece of good glassware and is afraid to close his fingers too hard. The door opened behind them. Wilhelmina Fairfax stepped out onto the porch. She looked at Evangeline. She looked at Absalom. She looked back at Evangeline. Then she said, matter of fact, breakfast is on. Come inside before the bacon gets cold. Also, child, we are going into Elk Basin this morning. You and I have something to show you at the church. Elk Basin First Methodist Church, a small clapboard building, white paint chipped at the corners, a steeple that had been struck by lightning in the spring of 1874 and rebuilt by hands from every household in the valley, a graveyard around 3 sides, 12 headstones. Wilhelmina had a key. She let them in through the back. The main sanctuary was cold, empty, 24 pine pews, a pulpit at the front, a cross on the wall above the pulpit made from timber cut by Wilhelmina's late husband, the Reverend Josiah Fairfax. In the summer of 1865, Wilhelmina led Evangeline past the pulpit, to a door behind it, a door Evangeline had not noticed. She unlocked that door too. Behind it, a small back room, a stove, a round table, 2 chairs, a wall lined with wooden drawers, the kind of drawers a person makes when they mean to store papers for a very long time. Wilhelmina lit a lamp. She sat down at the table. She gestured. Evangeline sat. Child? Yes, Aunt Wilhelmina. Do you know why I have been the librarian of Elk Basin First Methodist Church for the past 12 years? No, ma'am. Because my husband, Josiah, was killed 12 years ago in what the sheriff at the time called a tragic accident. He was thrown from his horse on the North Road. His neck was broken. He was found by 2 men from Kingsley Silver Mining Company at first light. Oh, Aunt Wilhelmina. Hush, child. Listen, my husband was a good rider. He had been in that saddle for 22 years. He did not fall from that horse. He was helped from that horse. And the reason he was helped from that horse is that he had, 3 days earlier, put his signature as witnessing officer on a document. That document, my dear, is in the top drawer of that wall. I have kept it for 12 years, waiting for the day when someone I trusted came into this room and asked me for it. Evangeline sat very still. Aunt Wilhelmina, what is the document? The original Elk Basin Homestead Grant of 1866, signed by President Johnson, signed by the territorial governor, signed by 23 founding families. Among them, my dear, the Fairfax family, the Youngblood family, and the family of your paternal grandmother, whose maiden name was Ridgway before it was married into your grandfather's line. Evangeline stopped breathing. That grant, child, was quietly recorded as lost in 1867. Every acre it deeded to the founding families was subsequently bought at scrap prices from the surviving heirs by a single mining concern owned by a man named Zephaniah Kingsley. That man is a millionaire 12 times over from silver taken out of your grandfather's ground and out of Ephraim Youngblood's ground and out of my Josiah's ground. That man had my husband killed for signing his name to that piece of paper. And that man had your father killed at Rattlesnake Ridge for the same reason. And I have been sitting in this room for 12 years, my dear, waiting for someone connected to that grant to walk in and ask me a single question. Evangeline swallowed. Aunt Wilhelmina. Yes, child. How much time do I have? How do you mean, my dear? To reclaim the land, under law. I read enough of my father's correspondence to know there is always a statute of limitations. Wilhelmina Fairfax smiled. It was the smile of a woman who has been waiting 12 years to be asked exactly that question. Child, the territorial statute of 1866, Section 14, provides direct descendants of the original grantees 12 years from the date of the alleged fraud to file a fraudulent conveyance reclamation claim in federal court. The fraud occurred in 1866. 12 years brings us to 1878. The specific filing deadline, as I have calculated it more times than I care to admit, is the 15th day of November of this present year. How many days is that from today? 31, child. 31 days. 31 days to file in Boise before a federal judge with original documentation and direct descendant standing. After the 15th of November this year, the right vanishes forever. And Zephaniah Kingsley knows it, my dear, which is why he has spent the last 12 years making very sure no direct descendant of the founding families ever walked into this church and asked me the question you just asked me. Evangeline felt the cold of the room move up her arms. Aunt Wilhelmina, if Mr. Kingsley knows the deadline is coming, and he knows I am the last living descendant of the Ridgway line, and I have arrived in Elk Basin 31 days before the deadline, then he is going to try to kill you, child, in the next 31 days, which is why the letter that brought you here worries me so very deeply. Because someone knew when to send for you. Someone knew the deadline. Someone forged Captain Youngblood's name for a reason. And I cannot yet tell whether that someone means to save you, or to hand you to Mr. Kingsley on a plate. The lamp between them burned very small and very steady. Outside the small back room, on the other side of the door, in the dust motes of the empty sanctuary, a bar of pale morning sun fell across the pine boards of the aisle, and somewhere on the road outside town, a horse was being ridden very hard. Evening. They came back to the cabin in Wilhelmina's wagon at sundown. The document, the original Elk Basin homestead grant of 1866, was wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside Wilhelmina's Bible, which was tucked inside her satchel, which sat between her feet on the wagon box. Nobody spoke on the ride back. At the cabin, Wilhelmina climbed down and said only, "Boys, I need to speak with Absalom in the barn. Miss Ridgway will retire early. Ferdinand, kindly see her to the loft." She and Absalom crossed the yard together. Evangeline watched them go. Merrick took the reins of the wagon. Ferdinand offered her his arm. She said, "Ferdinand, would it trouble you if I sat in the parlor a spell? I do not think I am ready to sleep." "No trouble at all, ma'am. Alone, if it does not offend." He looked at her a long second. Then he nodded. "I will be on the porch, ma'am, if you need aught." "Thank you, Ferdinand." She went inside. The lamp was low. The stove was warm. She stood in the middle of the long room. She looked around. 4 brothers, 4 bunks in the 2 lofts above, 1 long table, 1 stove, 1 bookshelf against the far wall, a saddle rack, a gun rack, a shelf above the stove with jars of preserves. On the far wall, tucked into an alcove between the bookshelf and the pantry door, was a small writing desk. She had not noticed it before. She walked to it. There were 4 things on it: a quill, an ink bottle, a stack of correspondence with a leather thong around it, and a small drawer. She should not have opened the drawer. She opened the drawer. Inside were 3 things: a folded page of a Sears Roebuck catalog, a pressed flower, dry, blue, a larkspur, and, tucked under the flower, a single sheet of writing paper, folded twice. She should not have unfolded it. She unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, small, careful. The paper was still new. The ink was still black. The letter began, "Dear Miss Ridgway." The letter ended, "Yours in earnest hope, Captain Absalom Youngblood." The letter, however, was not written in the hand of Captain Absalom Youngblood, because Captain Absalom Youngblood was, at that moment, in the barn with Wilhelmina Fairfax, and Evangeline had seen his handwriting on the outside of the field journal on the porch railing last night when he had thought she was asleep. And this handwriting was not that handwriting. This handwriting was smaller, younger. The hand of a man who had learned to write in a railroad clerk's office, copying manifest codes, and who had never quite lost the tight, neat clerical shape of it, even now that he was writing letters to strange women in Boston in his elder brother's name. Evangeline stood very still with the letter in her hand. Behind her the door opened. She did not turn. Jasper Youngblood walked into his own cabin. I saw his own desk, its drawer standing open. He saw the woman in the navy blue traveling dress standing in front of it with a letter in her hand. He stopped. His face went white. For a full second, neither one of them spoke. Then Evangeline turned, slow. She held the letter up. Her voice was very level, very quiet, very Boston. Mr. Youngblood, ma'am, would you care to explain why you have a draft of your elder brother's marriage proposal in your writing desk, in your own hand, signed with his name? Jasper Youngblood took his hat off. He held it against his chest in both hands. He looked at the floor. He said, "Ma'am, I reckon I owe you an accounting." "Yes, sir, I reckon you do." He looked up. His green eyes were wet. He said, "I read the Colonel's field journal, ma'am, 3 months ago. Absalom keeps it in the drawer under his bunk. I know he keeps it there. I know he has not opened it in 2 years. I was cleaning out the loft in April and I found it. And I read the last page, the one that says, 'Carry my daughter if she should ever need a carrying.' I read it 3 times, and I put it back where I found it, and I told myself I would forget it. And I could not forget it, because my brother has not slept a full night in 2 years, ma'am, and I love him more than I love my own life. And the Colonel's daughter was the only thing in the world he might have been willing to carry." He stopped. He drew breath. "So I wrote you. Ma'am, I looked up your address in the Boston directory at Miss Wilhelmina's library last summer. I wrote you a letter." In his hand. "I told myself he would thank me one day. I told myself I was saving him. I did not think of you, ma'am, at all. I only thought of him. And that was wrong. And I am asking your pardon." The parlor was silent, very silent. Even the coals in the stove seemed to hold their breath. Evangeline folded the letter. Once, twice. She held it in her hand. She looked at the young man in front of her, 28 years old. Tears in his eyes, hat pressed against his chest, and she thought about her father. And she thought about the field journal on the porch last night. And she thought about the man in the barn who had told her this morning, on the porch, that he had been carrying her father's weight for 2 years and 2 months and 5 days. She said, "Mr. Youngblood, ma'am, does your brother know you wrote this letter?" "No, ma'am." "Does anyone in this cabin know you wrote this letter?" "No, ma'am, not one." "Do you understand, Mr. Youngblood, that I have traveled 2,000 miles on the strength of that letter, that I have arrived in a country I do not know, among strangers, on the assurance that a man was expecting me who was not expecting me at all?" "Yes, ma'am, I do understand it, and I have not slept 2 nights myself since I heard the stage was on its way." She was silent a long moment. Outside, somewhere across the yard, the barn door creaked open and voices came into the yard, Absalom's low voice, Wilhelmina's answering it, the slow, deliberate crunch of 2 pairs of boots on gravel. Evangeline made her decision in the space between one breath and the next. She said, "Mr. Youngblood, I am going to keep this letter. I am not going to show it to your brother. Not tonight, not tomorrow. I will decide when. I will decide whether. But you and I will speak of it again. Do you understand me?" I was crying openly now, silent, shoulders shaking. "Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Youngblood, look at me." He looked up. "You did a foolish, dangerous, presumptuous thing, and you did it because you love your brother more than your own life. There is a name for that particular species of foolishness. Sir, my father had a word for it in his letters. He called it grace. It is not the same as wisdom, but it is not nothing. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then dry your face, sir, and come to the kitchen, because your brother is about to walk through that door with news that is going to change everything for everyone in this cabin. And you and I will not let him find us weeping over a letter." The door opened. Absalom and Wilhelmina came in from the cold. Absalom's face was set. He had aged 5 years in the barn. He looked around the room. He saw his youngest brother, standing near the desk, hat in his hand, eyes wet. I saw Evangeline, 2 paces away, letter in her palm, folded small, half hidden in the fabric of her skirt. He did not ask. Instead, he said, "Miss Ridgway." She looked up, green eyes on gray eyes. Steady now, both of them. Absalom, ma'am, we have 31 days, and I am fixin' to spend every one of them keeping you alive. Outside, the wind came down off the ridge, the pines moved in it, and in the loft above the kitchen, on the pillow where Evangeline Ridgway had lain the night before, her mother's Bible was open to the first psalm. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. The lamp in the parlor burns steady, and somewhere on the road below the cabin, 31 days began to count down toward the 15th of November and toward whatever the good Lord had planned for a girl from Boston, a captain who could not sleep, 3 brothers who did not yet know the shape of the storm coming for them, and a widow who had waited 12 long years to hand a piece of paper to the right pair of hands. Elk Basin that afternoon. Absalom drove the buckboard slow. Wilhelmina sat beside him with her Bible on her lap. Under the Bible, in a false pocket of her satchel that Wilhelmina had sewn there herself 12 years back with black thread and no witnesses, was the original Elk Basin homestead grant of 1866, 23 signatures, 2 territorial governor's seals, 1 president's mark, 12 years of one small gray-haired widow's patience. The buckboard came down out of the pines at the north edge of town. Absalom did not go straight to the main street. He turned east. He circled behind the livery. He came in past the graveyard, because a man who has been a captain does not walk in the front door when he has enemies. He walks in the back. He watches. He sees who is watching him. He pulled the buckboard up behind the Methodist parsonage. He set the brake. He looked at Wilhelmina. Ma'am, Absalom, you go on in the church. You wait. Do not answer the front door. Do not answer the back door. Only me. If I ain't back by 4 o'clock, you take the mule out the pasture yonder. You ride for the cabin. You do not go home to your own house. Not tonight. Are we understood? Understood. He helped her down. She patted his hand. She said, Son, ma'am, Josiah always said you were the best of Ephraim's boys. He was right. Absalom looked at her. His throat worked. He nodded once. She went in the back door of the church. He got back on the buckboard. He drove down Main Street. Slow. Elk Basin at 3 in the afternoon in the middle of October. Wagons at hitching posts. A dog asleep in the sun by the water trough. 2 old miners playing checkers on a barrel outside the general store. The saloon doors swinging soft in the wind. The sheriff's office at the far end. Absalom noted every single face. He counted horses at the hitching rails. He noted the brands. 2 he did not recognize. Both from down valley. Both with rifles in the scabbards and pistols on the pommels, which was not unusual by itself. Except the horses had been ridden hard that morning, which he could tell by the salt on their flanks, which meant they had come up from Boise, which meant Kingsley had already sent his rider, which meant Kingsley had already got word back, which meant Wilhelmina's 7-day estimate had been off by 5. Absalom Youngblood exhaled long and slow. He drove past the sheriff's office. He did not stop. He drove to the general store. He tied up. He went inside. He bought 60 rounds of .44 caliber for the Winchester. He bought a pound of coffee. He bought a small tin of ribbon candy. The clerk did not remark on any of it. The clerk was a man named Whitcomb who owed Ephraim Youngblood's memory a favor from the winter of '69 and had never once forgotten it. Whitcomb rang up the sale. He passed Absalom his change. He said low, without looking up, 2 men come in here at noon, asked after your cabin, asked how many brothers you got up there, asked if any of them had married yet. You tell 'em anything. I told 'em you was a widower. I told 'em your brothers was all bachelors. I told 'em I did not know how many. I sold 'em a bag of coffee and I watched 'em ride out south. They took the low road. Cap. They stop at the sheriff's. They was in there 20 minutes before they come to me. Absalom nodded. He pocketed the change. He picked up the ribbon candy. He looked at Whitcomb. Much obliged, sir. Cap. Yes. You take care of that little Ridgway gal. I knew her granddaddy. He was a decent man. There ain't so many decent men left in this valley I can afford to lose another one's grandbaby. Absalom did not ask how Whitcomb knew. Because in a town of 141 souls, a stagecoach passenger is a topic of conversation for 6 weeks running, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. He said only, "On my life, sir." He went out. He drove to the church. Wilhelmina came out the back door with her satchel in her hand. She climbed up. He turned the buckboard. They took the north road out. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. Then Wilhelmina said, "They come. They come. How many?" "Two I saw. Kingsley's men. From Boise. Not from Kingsley's ranch. No, ma'am. From Boise. Rode hard. Salt on the flanks." She was silent a long moment. She said, "Absalom." "Ma'am." Kingsley already knew. "Ma'am, I reckon Kingsley knew before she got off the stage." "Which means someone told him she was coming." "Which means someone told him she was coming." "Yes, ma'am." They rode another half-mile. The aspens were down to the last of their gold. The wind moved the leaves along the road. A raven called from a dead pine to the north. Wilhelmina said, "Quiet, Absalom." "Ma'am, who wrote that letter?" Absalom did not answer for a long time. Then he said, "I ain't sure yet, ma'am. But you have a notion." "I have a notion." "You gonna tell me the notion?" "No, ma'am, not yet. It ain't fair to name a name until I know." "That is a very captain answer. Absalom Youngblood." "I know it, ma'am." She patted the Bible in her lap. "All right, then, you sort your own house first. Just do not take too long, because the storm is closer than either of us reckoned." He nodded. He drove. At the cabin, Merrick met them in the yard. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. His forearms were black with forged soot to the elbows. He looked at his brother's face. He knew. They come already. They come. 2 riders. Kingsley men. In town at noon. Merrick spat into the dirt. He said, "Ferdinand and me been busy. Show me." Merrick led him around back. The forge was still warm. On the anvil, laid out neat, were 6 things. 2 lengths of thin steel wire cut to the same measure. A small hand-forged iron ring, hinged, 3 narrow iron bolts, each with a right-angle bend, a set of long, thin nails, painted black. Absalom looked at his brother. "Merrick." "Yes, brother." "Are you fixin' to do what I think you are fixin' to do?" "I am fixin' to do exactly what you think I am fixin' to do." Ferdinand agreed. Ferdinand come up with half of it. He read a book about it once. A book Miss Wilhelmina lent him. About how a man named Vauban defended a French town in 1600 and something. Ferdinand has been fixin' to try it for years. He is real happy right now. Absalom looked at the 6 pieces of iron. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the ridge above the cabin. He said, "How long?" "6 days if we work steady. 4 if we work through the nights." "Work through the nights." "Aye. Anything you need from town, you write it down. I will fetch it tomorrow. Do not go into Elk Basin yourself. Neither one of you. They know the 4 of us by sight. If they see either of you, they will start counting days." "Aye, brother." Absalom clapped his brother's shoulder. He walked away. He walked around the cabin. He walked to the porch. Jasper and Evangeline were on the porch. Jasper was mending a snare. Evangeline was reading aloud from a small book. She was reading the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. "Therefore take no thought, saying, 'What shall we eat?' or 'What shall we drink?' or 'Wherewithal shall we be clothed?'" Jasper was not looking at her. Jasper was listening. His hands moved through the snare knots without needing his eyes. His face was very still. Absalom stopped at the foot of the porch steps. He said, "Miss Ridgway." She looked up. She closed the book. "Yes, Absalom. Might I speak with you a spell? Alone." Her small hands folded on the closed Bible. Very neat. Very Boston. "Of course." She stood. Jasper stood too. Jasper looked at his brother. Absalom said, "Jasper, take a walk. Down to the spring. Do not go past the spring. 20 minutes. Jasper touched his hat brim. "Brother." He went. His boots crunched on the gravel path. The sound of him faded into the pines. The porch settled. Absalom came up the steps. He did not sit. Neither did she. He said, "Miss Ridgway." "Sir, I did not tell my brothers in the kitchen about the letter that brung you here, about the hand it was writ in, about the drawer where the drafts were kept. I did not tell them because I ain't got the shape of it yet." Silence. He went on. "I want you to understand something, ma'am. If it was Merrick or Ferdinand, that would be a matter I could handle inside this house. A stern word, some cold nights on the porch, it would pass. But if it was Jasper—" He stopped. He drew breath. "If it was Jasper, then it is a matter I do not know how to handle. Because Jasper is the youngest. Because Jasper come to us after the railroad let him go and he had nowhere to go. Because Jasper has been rebuilding who he is inside these walls for 4 years now. And I do not know if he can survive me looking at him the wrong way for even one day. Do you understand me, ma'am?" Her green eyes on his gray eyes. She said, "Yes, Absalom, I understand you." "Ma'am, if I ask you a direct question, will you answer me plain?" "I will answer you plain, sir." Long pause. He looked at the meadow. He looked back at her. He said, "Was it Jasper?" She did not answer for a full 3 heartbeats. Then she said, "Absalom Youngblood, I gave your brother my word last night that I would decide the timing of this myself. He accepted my terms. He accepted them because he understood what he had done. He wept for it. I will not go back on my word to him tonight. Not because I do not love you enough to answer you plain, but because if I go back on my word to him, I will never again in this life be a woman whose word can be trusted by any man. And I will not be that woman. Not for you, not for anyone. Do you understand me, sir?" Absalom Youngblood took his hat off. He held it against his chest. He looked at the porch boards. He said, "Yes, ma'am, I understand you. Sir, ma'am, when the storm is past, if we are all of us still alive when the storm is past, you and I and your brother will sit down at this table and we will speak of it together, all 3. And you will hear the whole of it from his own mouth, not mine. Is that acceptable to you?" He nodded. "Once," he said low. "Ma'am, I have not been spoke to like that in 8 years, not since my Cordelia, my wife. Sir, I did not know I missed it." She turned her face to the meadow. She did not answer. She could not. Because her heart had done something she had not given it permission to do. And she was a Boston woman. And Boston women did not give hearts permission for things, because of which she was in trouble. She knew it, but except, well, she had known it since the porch the night before, when his coat had been warm on her shoulders, and it had smelled like cedar oil and horse and wood smoke. Anyway, she was not going to think about it. She had 31 days, now 30. There would be time to think about it later, if there was a later. She said quiet, "Absalom, ma'am, kindly go tell your brother he may return from the spring. His snare is going to unravel if he leaves it half done." Absalom put his hat back on. He smiled, small, real, the first one she had seen on his face. He said, "Yes, Miss Ridgway." He went. Ledger Everhart came to the cabin at midnight on the 4th day. He came on foot. He came through the pines. He did not use the road. He was soaked with sweat clean through his shirt and shaking with cold when Jasper found him at the woodpile with his hand on the axe and his face crumpling. Jasper brought him inside. Absalom lit the lamp. Wilhelmina put a blanket around the boy. Merrick put coffee in his hand. Evangeline knelt on the floor beside him and unlaced his boots because his fingers were too cold to work the knots. The boy could not speak for a full minute. Then he did. His voice broke twice. He said, "Ma'am, Cap, I done wrong." "Tell it, son," Absalom said. The boy talked. His mother in the Elk Basin jail. The trumped-up charge. 6 months. Sheriff Vance leaning on him. Every scrap of news from every stage. He had told the sheriff about the Boston lady. He had told the sheriff the day she got off the stage. He had told the sheriff again yesterday morning when she and Miss Wilhelmina came in for provisions. And tonight, 2 hours ago, the sheriff had come into the livery. He had pressed something into Ledger's hand, a small brown glass bottle, sealed with red wax. I had said, "Boy, There is a fella name of Grimwood riding up here tomorrow. Dead-Eye Grimwood. From Deadwood. You know that name. Ledger had nodded, because everyone knew that name. The sheriff had said, Grimwood will come to the livery. He will hand you a message for Cap Youngblood. You will ride the message up. When you ride up, you will find yourself alone with the young lady from Boston at some point. Every young man finds his moment. When you find your moment, you will put this bottle in whatever she is drinking. Coffee, tea, water. Do not matter. She will fall asleep. She will not wake up. It will look like her heart. Some ladies have weak hearts. Boston ladies especially. You do this thing. Boy, your mother walks free next Tuesday. You fail this thing. Your mother don't walk out of that jail at all. The boy stopped. He held out his shaking hand. In it was the small brown glass bottle, sealed with red wax, full. Absalom took it. He turned it in the lamplight. He handed it to Wilhelmina without a word. Wilhelmina held it up to the lamp. She said, Absalom, ma'am, this is not tincture of anything a country doctor writes. This is Kingsley's private stock. He got some of it out of a Chinaman's shop in San Francisco 3 years back. My Josiah's cousin was a druggist there. My cousin sold Kingsley his first bottle. My cousin wrote me about it because he did not like the smell of the transaction. This here is a wolfsbane distillate. Boy, that is monk's hood. That is aconite. Full-grown deer stops breathing inside of 10 minutes. A little bit of a woman like Miss Ridgway. 3 minutes, maybe 4. And yes, it does look like the heart. God forgive them. The room went cold. Evangeline did not move. Ledger did not move. Ledger began to cry. Silent. Ashamed. 19 years old. Absalom knelt. He took the boy by both shoulders. He said, Ledger Everhart. Cap, look at me. The boy looked, wet eyes, terrified. Absalom said, you come to us. You did not do it. That is the whole of what matters. Boy, that is the whole of it. Are you listening to me? Cap, you are staying here tonight. You are not going back to that livery. Your mother comes out of that jail, I give you my word. Do you understand me? Cap, she'll die. He'll kill her. He will not, because we will get her out before he knows you are gone. Miss Wilhelmina. How many marshals in Boise right now that you know by name? 2. Federal Deputy Elias Northfield. Deputy Rutherford Stormwell. Both good men. Both owe my Josiah's memory more than they know how to repay. You can get to them by telegraph. I can. The telegraph office in Boise, not Elk Basin. Elk Basin's key operator is Vance's cousin. How long by rider? 2 days hard. 1.5 if the weather holds. Ferdinand. Ferdinand stood up from the corner where he had been listening. Aye, brother. You, tonight, take my roan. Ride for Boise. Do not stop except to change horses at the Hawkwood Ranch. You will find money in the tin above the pantry. Take all of it. When you get to Boise, you go straight to Deputy Northfield. You tell him the whole story. You tell him about Miss Ridgway. You tell him about the grant. You tell him about the deadline. You bring him and Stormwell and any federal manpower they can raise back up this valley as fast as horses will carry them. And you fetch Ledger's mother out of the Elk Basin jail on the way through. That is a lawful writ of habeas corpus, and any federal deputy can serve one on a territorial sheriff. Are we understood? Understood. You leave in an hour. Go pack. Merrick. Aye. You and me finish the yard tonight. All the way. No more waiting on nights. Tonight is the night we finish. Aye. Jasper. Aye, brother. You take Miss Ridgway and Miss Wilhelmina and this boy here. You take them up to the caves above the burn. You take rifles. You take food for 3 days. You take blankets. You take the mule for the ladies. You go before first light. You do not come out until either Ferdinand's marshals ride into the yard or the 15th of November comes and goes. Whichever comes first. Are we understood? Jasper looked at Evangeline. Evangeline looked at Jasper. Jasper looked back at his brother. He said, Brother. Yes, I am not leaving this cabin. Jasper. Brother, listen to me, please. Absalom went still. Jasper drew breath. He said, "Ma'am." Evangeline said, "Yes, Mr. Youngblood." "Ma'am, I release you from your word to me. Tell him. Tell him now." Evangeline closed her eyes. She opened them. She looked at Absalom. She said, quiet, level, "Absalom, your brother wrote the letter that brought me here. He wrote it because he read the last page of my father's field journal 3 months ago in the loft. He wrote it because he loved you enough to break every rule in your house to try to save you. He has not slept 2 nights straight since he heard my stage was coming. He is releasing me from my word to keep the timing of this because he is not going to hide in a cave while his family faces guns for a thing he caused. That is the whole of it, sir. It is not mine to keep from you any longer. He has released me." Absalom Youngblood looked at his youngest brother for a very long time. The lamp burned steady. The stove ticked. The wind moved outside. Ferdinand and Merrick did not breathe. Wilhelmina watched. Ledger watched. Evangeline watched. Then Absalom Youngblood, 42 years old, elder brother, captain of forgotten men, widower of 8 winters, walked around the table. He walked to his youngest brother. He put both hands on Jasper's shoulders. He looked into Jasper's eyes. He said, "Little brother, thank you." Jasper's face broke. He said, "Brother, I done wrong. I done hush." Absalom pulled Jasper against his chest. He put one hand on the back of Jasper's head. He held him. The way a man holds a brother he raised. The way an elder brother has held a younger brother since Cain and Abel got it so terribly wrong the first time. He said quiet into Jasper's ear, so only Jasper heard, "You brung me my life back into this cabin. Brother, you brung me a reason to open the Colonel's book after 2 years. You did a foolish, presumptuous, dangerous, wonderful thing, and I am not ever going to forget it. Do you hear me?" Jasper wept, silent, shoulders shaking. Absalom held him. Wilhelmina wiped her eyes. Evangeline turned her face to the stove because her own eyes had spilled over and she did not want anyone to see. Merrick cleared his throat. Loud. I said, "Well then, reckon we got a night to work through. Ferdinand, you are riding. Absalom, you are with me at the yard. Ma'am, ladies, kid, you get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow is fixin' to be a real long day." They moved. At first light, Ferdinand was gone. His roan turned south out of the meadow at a hard canter. Ledger's mother would sleep in the Youngblood cabin by Wednesday night, or Ferdinand would die trying. Absalom stood on the porch and watched his brother ride out. Evangeline came out behind him with a cup of coffee. She handed it to him. He took it. He did not speak. She stood beside him. The sun came up over the east ridge, gold on his face, gold on hers. She said, "Absalom, ma'am, may I ask a favor?" "Anything, Miss Ridgway. When this is over, if we are all of us alive when this is over, I should like to visit my father's grave in Elk Basin. My mother could not bring him back to Boston. She wrote to me once that he was buried up here. She meant to come. She died before she could. I have never seen his stone." Absalom did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, quiet, "Ma'am, I will take you to your father's grave myself, on my own 2 feet, on the day the marshals ride out of this valley. That is a promise." "Thank you, sir." "Ma'am." "Yes, I dug that grave myself." Her breath caught. He kept his eyes on the ridge. "Him and Sergeant Copperfield, my sergeant, and Corporal Overholt, and young Rufus Wolfsbane, who was 18 years old and had baked a batch of biscuits the day before he died. I brought them out of Rattlesnake Ridge on a wagon and I dug them into the Elk Basin churchyard because the colonel had said in his book he wanted to be buried here, and I did not know at the time that was what his book said, ma'am. But I knew what he told me one night around a fire in April of '76. He said, "Absalom, if I fall out here, you put me under a pine that has a view. Not in Boston. I have been in Boston. There is no view in Boston. So I put him under a pine that has a view. Ma'am, I want you to know that." Evangeline's throat closed clean shut. She could not speak. She reached over. She put her small hand on his rough hand where it held the coffee cup. She squeezed once, He did not turn his head, but his other hand came up, and it covered hers, and they stood on the porch a long time and watched the sun on the ridge, because there is a certain kind of silence between two people that says more than any letter in Boston could ever have said. Because Boston is a long way from a pine that has a view, and because his hand was very warm, and hers was very cold, until it was not cold anymore. The riders came on the 7th day, 15 of them, Kingsley's foreman at the head. 6 of them peeled off at the tree line and came around the back. The other 9 came up the road at a walk. They did not draw yet. They were still pretending this was a conversation. Absalom stood on the porch. Merrick stood on the roof of the barn with the sharps. Jasper stood behind the door of the smokehouse with the Winchester. Evangeline stood inside the cabin with the door barred. Wilhelmina stood beside her with a Colt she had loaded herself and had not fired since 1859. Ledger stood behind Evangeline with a rolling pin, because a 19-year-old boy with no gun training and steady hands is more use with a rolling pin than a rifle. Absalom's word. The foreman reined up at the porch step. He tipped his hat. He was a small, neat, sunburned man named Prescott. He said, "Captain Youngblood." "Prescott, Mr. Kingsley sends his compliments and a business proposition. Say your piece. I is prepared to offer $12,000 in Denver gold for the parcel your father filed on. Cash on the barrel today. In addition, he requests you kindly hand over the young lady in your keeping. She has misrepresented herself in this valley. Mr. Kingsley intends to see her safely return to her people in Boston. He is prepared to pay her passage." Absalom Youngblood did not move. He said, "Prescott." "Yes, sir." "Tell Mr. Kingsley I have counted 7 of your riders on the road. Where's the other 8? Prescott did not answer. Absalom said, "Merrick." From the barn roof, Merrick fired 1 round from the sharps. 200 yards out, behind the tree line, a man screamed once, then went silent. Then Merrick fired a 2nd round. Another scream, another silence. Prescott's face did not move, but his neck did. A single vein just under the jaw, twitched, Absalom said. "That is 2 of 6 behind the tree line. My brother Jasper is holding the other 4 in his sight from the smokehouse. He can put a round through any one of them from this porch. Would you like him to demonstrate?" Prescott said. "No, sir." "Then take your 9 and your surviving 4. Prescott, ride down out of this valley. Tell Mr. Kingsley the deed to this cabin is not for sale. Tell him the young lady is not for sale. Tell him if he sends riders up this road again, I will not send them home. Are we understood?" Prescott's neck twitched again. He said, "Captain, yes, I have known your father. Ephraim was a fair man. He would not have sent me back to Kingsley with 2 dead men in the pines and no answer," Absalom said. "Prescott, you knew my father. You have not known me. Ride on." Prescott sat his horse a long moment. Then he wheeled. He gave a low whistle. 9 riders wheeled with him. The 4 behind the tree line came out of the pines. 2 of them were leading the horses of the 2 men Merrick had shot. The horses had bodies over their saddles, roped. The bodies did not move. The 9 and the 4 rode down the valley road. Absalom stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then he turned to the door. He said, "Quiet, ma'am. You can come out now." Evangeline barred the door. She stepped out onto the porch. She looked at Absalom. She said, "Absalom, ma'am, that was the first proposition. It will not be the last." "No, ma'am, it will not." "Then perhaps we ought to have coffee." He looked at her. He nearly smiled. He said, "Yes, Miss Ridgway, perhaps we ought." 2 nights later, the Youngblood cabin burned, not the main cabin, the smokehouse. At 2 in the morning, someone had come up the creek bed on foot. Someone had known the ridge. Someone had thrown 3 bottles of coal oil at the smokehouse wall and 1 lit rag. Jasper woke first. He was awake before the fire itself was awake, because Jasper Youngblood, 28 years old, cursed with the hearing of a hunted animal, had not slept a full sleep in 7 nights. He came out of his bunk in his long underwear with the Winchester in his hand. I was out the back door before Absalom was down the loft ladder. He was around the corner of the barn before Merrick had his boots on. He came face to face with a man in a black kerchief mask. The man in the mask raised a pistol. Jasper fired first. One round from the Winchester, center of the chest. The man went backward into the burning smokehouse wall. Jasper did not stop. He heard footsteps in the creek bed. He ran, because his brothers were behind him, because the cabin had the ladies in it, and the fire was on the wrong side of the yard for the cabin to be in danger yet. Because Jasper Youngblood had spent 7 nights understanding that if there was ever a moment to prove to his elder brother that he was worth the mercy he had been given, this was that moment. He ran down the creek bed after the second man. He caught him. The second man turned. The second man had a knife. Jasper had a Winchester. But at close range and in the dark, a knife is a fast thing. Jasper felt the burn along his ribs before he heard the sound of it. He did not stop. He drove the butt of the Winchester into the second man's temple. The second man dropped. Jasper stood over him a moment, breathing hard. Then his knees went. He sat down in the creek. The water was cold. He was bleeding. He heard Merrick call his name from up by the smokehouse. He did not answer for a moment. Then he called back. "Down the creek. I am all right. Only nicked." He was lying. But he was Youngblood. And Youngbloods lie about nicks. By first light, the smokehouse was a black ruin. 2 dead men on the ground, one with a Winchester bullet in the chest, the other with a Winchester butt across the temple, and his wrist tied with baling wire behind him, because Absalom had come down the creek bed at first light and found him only stunned. Stunned, Jasper was on the kitchen table, shirt off. Evangeline had a needle in her fingers. Wilhelmina had the lamp. Merrick was holding his brother's hand. Absalom stood at the head of the table. He said low, "Miss Ridgway, you are certain?" She said, "Absalom, my mother taught me to embroider when I was 7 years old. I have set worse cuts than this on my father's dogs when I was 12. I am certain. Kindly move the lamp closer. Aunt Wilhelmina." She set 14 stitches, small, neat, Boston. Jasper watched her the whole time. He did not flinch. He did not make a sound. When she was done, she tied off the last stitch. She cut the thread with her teeth. She wiped the blood on a clean cloth. She looked up. She said, "Mr. Youngblood, ma'am, you are going to have a very fetching scar." He almost laughed. He caught it. He said, "Ma'am, I reckon." Wilhelmina bandaged him. Absalom lifted him off the table. Merrick helped him to a chair. They all stood a moment in the lamplight. Then Absalom said, "That was not Kingsley's men from town." "How you know?" Merrick said. "The clothes, the boots, the knife hilt on the one you cracked." Jasper, "That knife come out of Deadwood. That is Grimwood's outfit. Dead-Eye Grimwood. He come up quiet in the night. His job is to burn us out. Kingsley's job in the morning is to ride in for the girl once we are outside with a fire to fight. Which means they will be here at sunrise," Wilhelmina said. "Ferdinand should reach Boise tonight." "Yes? Marshals cannot possibly be back before Wednesday." "No. That is 3 days. That is 3 days. Absalom Youngblood. Ma'am, we may not have 3 days." He looked at her. He looked at his brothers. He looked at Evangeline. He said quiet, "Then we hold what we hold until we hear hooves in the road. That is all we can do." Sunrise, they came. 20 of them this time. Dead-Eye Grimwood at the head. Prescott beside him. Sheriff Obadiah Vance in the middle rank with a scattergun across his saddlebow and a face like a man who has stopped being able to look himself in a mirror. They came up the road at a slow, steady walk. They stopped 100 yards from the porch. Grimwood raised his hand. Prescott called out, "Captain Youngblood." Absalom stepped onto the porch. He held a white cloth. "Not surrender." He said, "Prescott, Grimwood, Sheriff, I want you to listen a moment before we start our business." Grimwood laughed. He said, "Captain, there is no business to listen to. Give up the girl. You keep your cabin. You keep your brothers. You keep your life," Absalom said. "Sheriff Vance." The sheriff did not answer. Absalom said, "Vance, look at me." The sheriff looked at him. Absalom said, "Quiet. Vance, your brother is not going to be hung in Denver next month." The sheriff's face did a thing, very small, a widening of the eyes, a slight parting of the mouth. Absalom said, "His pardon was signed 9 days ago by the acting territorial governor. Miss Wilhelmina Fairfax knew a man who was owed a favor from 1864. Your brother walks out of Denver jail on the 10th of November, whether you help Kingsley today or you don't help Kingsley today. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Vance." The sheriff sat very still on his horse. Grimwood turned to look at him. Prescott turned to look at him. The other 17 riders turned to look at him. The sheriff said, very quietly, "Cap, if you are lying to me, Miss Wilhelmina." Wilhelmina stepped onto the porch beside Absalom. She had a folded telegraph flimsy in her hand. She had received it 3 days back. She held it up. She said, "Sheriff, ride up, read her. Then decide what side of this yard you are fixin' to be on." The sheriff looked at Grimwood. Grimwood said, "Vance, you move, I put a bullet in your neck." The sheriff looked at Grimwood. The sheriff said, "Grimwood, I have wanted to arrest you for 6 years." He drew his scattergun off the saddle in a single smooth motion, 20 years faster than any man in that yard had expected of a 55-year-old sheriff. He fired both barrels at Deadeye Grimwood at 4 feet. Grimwood came out of the saddle in a red mist. The yard exploded. Merrick fired from the barn roof. Jasper fired from the smokehouse door with his ribs still bleeding through the bandage. Absalom fired from the porch. Wilhelmina fired the Colt out the window of the parlor and hit a man in the shoulder and looked as surprised as anyone in the yard. Evangeline reloaded Wilhelmina's Colt with hands that did not shake. The sheriff turned his empty scattergun into a club and broke the wrist of the man on his left before the man on his left could get a pistol out of a holster. 11 minutes. By Wilhelmina's little brass mantel clock, which she had brought up from her house in the wagon with the Bible for reasons she never explained to anyone. 11 minutes. By the end of the 11 minutes, 9 of Grimwood's men were dead. 6 had thrown down their weapons and were flat on their bellies in the yard. 3 had turned and run down the road. Grimwood was dead in the dust of the yard. Prescott was dead beside him. Sheriff Obadiah Vance was alive, wounded in the arm, sitting with his back against a porch post, looking up at Absalom Youngblood with an expression on his face that a man wears exactly once in his life. He said, "Cap, Vance, I done a very bad thing at Rattlesnake Ridge. I know it. Vance, I aim to say it, out loud, to a federal judge. I ain't asking for mercy. I am asking to say it out loud, because it has been eating me alive 12 years. Absalom knelt. He looked at Sheriff Vance. He said, "You will say it, Vance, in front of God and country. You will say it, and my Sergeant Copperfield's memory will hear you say it, and my Sergeant Overholt's memory will hear you say it, and the Colonel will hear you say it. And I do not know if the Lord will forgive you. That is between you and him. But you will say it, and you will live through the saying of it. Do you hear me?" Vance closed his eyes. He said, "I hear you, Cap." Evangeline came out of the cabin. Her navy blue traveling dress was torn at the hem. Her hair had come clean out of its bun. There was gunpowder on her cheek. She walked to Absalom. She looked at him. She said, "Absalom, ma'am, there is a woman coming up the road." He turned. There was, down at the tree line, a single rider on a paint horse, a woman in a doeskin dress, her long black hair braided and hung with silver beads. A cavalry Springfield across the saddlebow. 6 Shoshone riders behind her. She reined up at the edge of the yard. She did not dismount. She looked at the dead men in the dirt. She looked at the smokehouse ruin. She looked at Absalom Youngblood. She said, in perfect careful English, "Ephraim Youngblood's son. Ma'am, my father was rides above the storm. Your father cut him out of a bear trap in the winter of 1853 when no one else in this valley would touch him because his people had killed white men that summer. Your father brought my father home to my mother on a travois. My father lived 19 years after that. I am Willow Rides Thunder of the Sawtooth Band. I am the daughter my father named after the willow that saved him. My people owe your father a debt. I have been waiting since I was a girl to pay it." She looked at the yard. She said, "It seems I am late." Absalom Youngblood said, "Ma'am, You are not late. You are just in time. There are yet 3 days to hold this valley until federal marshals come. And Zephaniah Kingsley is still down in Elk Basin with the biggest silver mine and the deepest pocketbook west of Cheyenne. And I would be much obliged for 6 good rifles on my ridge. Willow Rides Thunder inclined her head. She said, "You have them, and more. My cousin is riding for our western camp tonight. There will be 20 of us by tomorrow morning." She looked past Absalom. She looked at Evangeline. She said, quiet, "Colonel Ridgway's daughter." Evangeline's breath caught. "How did you know?" "Because your father spent the winter of '75 in my mother's lodge." "Ma'am, he was gathering information about Kingsley from us. I was the only white officer in this territory who ever asked our permission before crossing our land. He drank my mother's tea. He held my little brother on his knee. He spoke of you often. He said your eyes were the color of the spruce needles in June. He was right." Evangeline began to cry. Silent. She did not know she was crying. Willow Rides Thunder dismounted. She walked to Evangeline. She took Evangeline's hands in both of hers. She said, "Sister, your father did not die alone." Evangeline said, "How do you know?" "Because 2 of my brothers were at the top of Rattlesnake Ridge that morning. They tried to warn him. They rode down the ridge shouting. They were too late. But they were with him at the end. They pulled him out of the fire. They laid him down under a pine. They sang the song for his passing. My people knew his name, ma'am. My people know his name still. He was a good man. He was not alone." Evangeline put her forehead against Willow Rides Thunder's shoulder. She wept for her father. For the first time, truly. Not the polite Boston weeping of a funeral. The real weeping of a daughter who had at last been given permission to know that her father had not died in a strange place among strangers. Absalom watched. He took his hat off. He held it against his chest. And in the yard of the Youngblood cabin, in the smoke of the burnt smokehouse, over the bodies of 9 dead men, under a pale October sun in the Sawtooth Basin, 2 women stood holding on to each other. One from Boston, one from a Shoshone lodge. And they wept together for a colonel who had been kind to them both. And Absalom Youngblood, who had thought 2 years and 2 months and 14 days ago that his life had ended in a pass above the East Ridge. Absalom Youngblood understood, for the first time, that his life had, in fact, been waiting for him, that his life had been on a stagecoach, that his life had walked into his yard 8 days before, that his life had just now looked up over another woman's shoulder and met his eyes, and that his life was not planning to leave the Sawtooth Basin, not now, not ever, assuming, of course, that any of them survived the next 3 days. Wilhelmina Fairfax looked at the sky. She looked at the clock. She said, "Boys, get these dead ones off my yard. Get the sheriff into the parlor. Get Miss Willow and her people some coffee. Get that fire out for good. Get Jasper's bandage changed. Get the powder counted. Because I do declare, we have got exactly 3 days to hold this ridge, and I have not fired a Colt peacemaker since the year the war broke out, and I am going to need a nap by 2 o'clock. And someone tell me where I put my spectacles. I cannot see the front sight without my spectacles." Merrick handed her the spectacles. They had been on her head the whole time. She looked at him. She said, "Bless you, son." She put them on. She walked into the cabin to reload. Because it was time. Night 1 after the first attack. The Youngblood cabin held 23 souls. 4 Youngblood brothers, minus Ferdinand, who was somewhere on the road to Boise, 1 Boston lady, 1 gray-haired widow, 1 19-year-old boy with a rolling pin, and now a rifle he did not know how to use, 1 sheriff with a bandaged arm and a face that had not stopped looking at the floor since sunup. Willow Rides Thunder. 6 Shoshone riders. 6 Kingsley men in the pantry with their hands tied behind them and gags in their mouths. The dead were laid out in the barn, covered, prayed over, by Wilhelmina, in a voice that shook only once. The cabin smelled of coffee and gunpowder and pine smoke and blood. The stove had not been cold for 11 hours. Merrick was cleaning the Winchester on the kitchen table. Jasper was on a pallet in the corner, ribs bandaged, refusing to lie down flat, sitting propped against the wall with his rifle across his knees. Absalom stood at the window. He had not moved for 20 minutes. Evangeline came to him with a cup of coffee. She did not speak. She put the cup in his hand. He said, "Ma'am, Absalom, they will come again. I know. Tomorrow, or the night after. Not sooner. Grimwood was their fastest gun. Prescott was their smartest. They are down to hired men now. Kingsley is going to send a lot of them." "I know." "Ma'am." "Yes. I want you to go with Willow." She turned to look at him. Slow. He did not turn. He kept his eyes on the dark yard. He said, "She has an offer. She spoke it to me an hour ago. She will take you and Miss Wilhelmina and Ledger up to her people's winter camp. It is a day's ride west. Kingsley does not know the country. He cannot find it. You will be safe there until the marshals ride up. You will be safe there until the 15th of November. You will be safe there, ma'am, and it is not a small thing to me that you would be safe." She did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, "Absalom Youngblood, ma'am, look at me." He looked. She said, "My father did not raise me to run. Ma'am, my father raised me to stand where I ought to stand. My father raised me to know the difference between courage and foolishness, which is a distinction I have been considering carefully all evening. And I have decided that standing in this cabin beside the man who dug my father's grave with his own hands falls, in my estimation, on the side of courage." He opened his mouth. She held up a small hand. She was not finished. She said, "Furthermore, if I am not present in this cabin when Kingsley's men come tomorrow, then Kingsley will know I am elsewhere, and Kingsley will send half his riders to hunt me on the mountain, and I will not have those men riding down on Willow's camp because of me. So I shall stay. Aunt Wilhelmina shall stay. Ledger may go to Willow's camp if he wishes. It is not his fight. But the deed is my inheritance. The name is mine. The blood is mine. I shall stay." Absalom looked at her a long moment. He said, quiet, "I did not think you would go. Then why did you ask?" "Because I had to try, ma'am. I had to be a man who tried." She took his rough hand. She turned it over. She looked at the palm. She traced one small pale line across it with her finger. She said, "This is a scar." What made it?" "A piece of grape shot. In '64. The wilderness. 28 years old." You have been carrying weight a long while. Absalom Youngblood." Ma'am. "You will not carry mine. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not any day. Do you understand me?" He closed her small hand inside his large one. He said, "I understand you, Evangeline." It was the second time he had said her name. It was the first time he had said it without meaning to. She heard it. She did not correct him. She said, "Now, come away from the window. Drink your coffee. Miss Wilhelmina is fixin' to say the evening prayer, and you will not want to miss it. She has been sharpening it since the smokehouse burned." He almost smiled. He came. The evening prayer. Wilhelmina Fairfax stood at the head of the long table. 23 heads bowed, even the 6 Kingsley men in the pantry. She did not read from her Bible. She said the 91st Psalm from memory, because a woman who has been a preacher's wife for 34 years has certain psalms in her bones. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler, and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day." She stopped. The cabin listened. The wind moved outside. A coyote called once from the far ridge. Wilhelmina lifted her head. She said, "Amen." Every voice in the cabin said, "Amen." Even the sheriff. Even Willow rides thunder, in her own language, quietly, from her chair by the door. Then Wilhelmina said, "Right, victuals is on. Nobody dies hungry tonight. Eat up." The venison stew went around the table. Evangeline ate 2 full bowls, because a body that has fired a Colt Peacemaker 3 times, mended a rifle wound with 14 stitches, and cried in the arms of a Shoshone woman for the first honest time about her dead father, that body is a hungry body. She was learning. Slow. But she was learning. Day 2. Cold morning. Frost thick on the ridge. No attack. Which was worse than an attack. Because it meant Kingsley was thinking. Absalom did not let the cabin rest. He had the men digging. Trenches at the tree line. Fallback positions behind the barn. A pit trap on the switchback of the road. Merrick and 2 of Willow's men set the pit. Sharpened stakes. Elk hide over the top. Loose dirt on the hide. A dead branch across the road to make riders slow. Ferdinand's book about the Frenchman had been very specific. Ferdinand had been very proud. Ferdinand was still not back. By noon, Absalom had begun to worry about Ferdinand. By 2 o'clock, Absalom had stopped letting himself worry about Ferdinand because worry did not fetch a brother home from Boise any faster. Evangeline sat on the porch with Wilhelmina. They were rolling bandages from a bolt of clean muslin Wilhelmina had brought up in the wagon a week back. Wilhelmina said, "Child, Aunt Wilhelmina, tell me true. How do you feel about that man?" "Which man? Do not play coy with me, my dear. You are not the coy sort." Evangeline rolled a bandage. She rolled it tight. She did not look up. She said, "Aunt Wilhelmina, I do not know how I feel. I have known him 9 days. I have known his brothers 9 days. I have watched him hold his youngest brother in his arms in that kitchen, and I have watched him dig graves for men he did not love, and I have watched him walk down the aisle of a stagecoach porch to hand a stranger down from a wagon with the tremor in his hand he thought I did not see. And I know what my mother told me about my father. She said, 'Evangeline, when the right one comes, you will not need a year of Sunday parlor visits to know it. You will know it in the first afternoon. Your father made me want to iron his shirts by the second hour.' Well then, but I am afraid, Aunt Wilhelmina, of him. No, not of him, of the shape of it, of what it would mean, of the fact that I have only been in this cabin 9 days, and I have already caught myself thinking about where I would put the lamp when I did the mending, and where the crib would go if there were ever a crib, and how you might teach reading to the children of this valley in the parlor of this cabin on Wednesday afternoons. That, Aunt Wilhelmina, that is what I am afraid of, that I have made a home in my head of a house I have no right to." Wilhelmina rolled a bandage. She said, "Child, yes, that house has been waiting for you 8 years. Aunt Wilhelmina, hush, I am not finished. That house has been waiting 8 years for a lamp to be lit in the corner where the mending gets done. That man on that porch has been waiting 8 years for a woman with the good sense to iron his shirts by the second hour. God does not send a stagecoach 2,000 miles for nothing. And he does not put a girl in the same yard as her father's best pupil for coincidence. The lamp goes in the corner by the window. My dear, the crib goes at the foot of the loft ladder. The schoolroom is Wednesday and Friday afternoons, and I will teach beside you. That is not a house you have made in your head. That is a house he has already built. You have only to walk into it." Evangeline set down her bandage. She looked at the floor. She said, quiet, "Aunt Wilhelmina, yes, you have made me cry twice this week, and I have not cried in Boston in 2 years. That is what old women are for. Child, now roll your bandages. There is fixin' to be a great deal of use for them." Day 3. Ferdinand rode into the yard at 11 in the morning. He had 4 federal deputies behind him, and Sheriff Vance's brother, alive, walking, free, and Ledger Everhart's mother, alive, walking, free, and a federal judge from Boise named Bartholomew Ridgefield, who had known Colonel Ridgway personally in the war, and who had, when Ferdinand had laid the whole story out for him at 4 in the morning in his own parlor, called for his boots and his coat and his gavel in that order. The judge came down off his horse. He looked at the smokehouse ruin. He looked at the fresh graves at the edge of the meadow. He looked at the 23 souls in and around the Youngblood cabin. He looked at Absalom Youngblood. He said, "Captain, Judge, I have read every telegraph flimsy in Boise this morning. I have taken sworn statements from your brother and from Miss Fairfax's telegraph testimony. I have signed an emergency writ for the arrest of Zephaniah Kingsley on charges of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, and treason against the territorial government. I have with me 4 federal deputies. I would very much like to ride down that mountain now and see this business finished. Will you accompany me?" Absalom said, "Judge, I will." Wilhelmina said, "Judge, so will I." The judge looked at her. He knew her. He tipped his hat. He said, "Miss Wilhelmina, it has been a long 12 years." She said, "Bartholomew Ridgefield, it has been a very long 12 years indeed. Kindly do not keep me waiting a 13th." He almost laughed. He said, "Ma'am, I would not dream of it." They rode down the mountain. Absalom, Merrick, Ferdinand, Jasper over his brother's objections, riding side saddle to spare his stitches, Sheriff Vance, the judge, 4 federal deputies, Willow rides Thunder and 4 of her men, Ledger Everhart, because he had earned it, Wilhelmina in a small buggy the deputies had brought up from town, Evangeline in the buggy beside her, because Evangeline was not being left in a cabin. Not today, because Evangeline was going to see the man in his silk cravat and his gold watch chain with her own 2 eyes. Because her father had earned that for her. They came down the switchback. They passed the pit trap. They uncovered it and left the hide beside the road as a courtesy to future travelers. They came out of the pines above Elk Basin. The town lay below them in the noon sun. Smoke from the chimneys. A dog barking at nothing. The little white steeple of the Methodist church catching the light. Kingsley's great stone house on the far ridge above the town. Windows shining. Absalom drew rein. He looked at the judge. He said, "Judge, he will fight." "Yes. He has 10 men in that house at least." "Yes. Some of them will die." "Yes. Will you go in first?" "I will. I have a writ. If he has a lick of legal sense left, he will step out to receive it. If he does not, then it is a shootin' matter, and I will read the writ over his body. Either way, we finish this today." Absalom nodded. I looked him at his brothers. He said, "Boys." They looked at him. I said, "We started this together. We end it together. Merrick, you with me on the right. Ferdinand, you and the deputy's frontal at the door. Jasper, you with Willow on the left. Vance, you take his housekeeper's entrance around the back. He has a back door most folks do not know about. You know it. I know it. You take that door. Everyone hold fire until the judge calls it. Everyone. You do not fire on that house until the judge has done his part. Am I understood?" 16 voices said, "Aye." Evangeline sat in the buggy. She held Wilhelmina's hand. She did not know she was holding it. Wilhelmina did not remark upon it. They rode down into Elk Basin. Every soul in Elk Basin came out to watch. Whitcomb from the general store, apron still on, ledger book still in his hand. The 2 old miners from the checkers game, checkers still on the barrel behind them. The pastor of the Methodist church, in shirt sleeves because he had been chopping wood behind the parsonage when he heard hooves. Every woman in the town stood at her front gate. Every child stood at the edge of the road. Because word of the Youngblood cabin siege had traveled. Because the town of Elk Basin, 141 souls, had spent the last 3 days knowing that a war was being fought on the ridge above them and pretending they did not know it. Now the war was riding through them. The judge in front, Absalom Youngblood at his right, the Ridgeway girl in the buggy, Wilhelmina Fairfax beside her. The people of Elk Basin watched, and in the eyes of the people of Elk Basin, because Evangeline saw it, and she would remember it all her life, was something she had not expected. Relief. The town was relieved, because it turned out the whole town, every single soul, had known Kingsley was a rotten man, had known him for years, had been afraid to say so, had been waiting to say so, and now, at last, someone was riding to the man's front door to make him answer. Someone was going to say it out loud. For 12 years the town had been holding its breath. The town let it out. At Kingsley's gate, the judge dismounted. He walked up the flag path, alone, writ in his hand. Absalom stayed at the gate. Merrick took the right corner of the wrought iron fence. Ferdinand and the 4 federal deputies fanned across the lawn. Jasper and Willow took the left. Vance disappeared around back. The judge went to the great oak door. He knocked once. He knocked twice. He knocked 3 times. The door opened. A butler, small, English, terrified. The butler said, "The gentleman is not receiving today." The judge said, "The gentleman will receive me. I am Judge Bartholomew Ridgefield of the Federal District of Idaho Territory. I bear a writ for the arrest of your employer. Kindly step aside." The butler stepped aside. Because the butler was not paid enough. The judge went in. There was silence. Long silence. The kind of silence that stretches a man's nerves clean out of his skin. Then a single shot. From inside the house. Absalom moved. He was up the path in 6 strides. Merrick at his shoulder. Winchester's level. They came into the great front hall. Marble floor. Chandelier. A wide sweeping staircase. At the foot of the staircase, Judge Ridgefield stood, unhurt, the writ still in his hand. At the top of the staircase, on the landing, Zephaniah Kingsley lay in his silk dressing gown, a single pistol beside him, a single wound in his temple, his eyes open, empty. Not a fight, not a shootout. A man who had heard a judge at his door and had understood in the same second what the door meant, and had decided. Absalom Youngblood stood in the marble hall. He looked up at the body. He said, quiet. "So," the judge said. "So," Merrick said. "The Lord takes what the Lord takes. My pa used to say." Absalom said, "He does. Sometimes he takes a coward's way. That ain't for us to say." The judge said, "It ain't, Captain. Will you kindly go tell the rest to stand down? There will be no fighting today. I would rather they hear it from your voice than from mine." Absalom nodded. He went out. He stood on the front steps of Zephaniah Kingsley's great stone house. He raised both hands. He called out, "Boys, he is done. He done it himself. Stand easy." The 4 federal deputies lowered their rifles. Ferdinand lowered his. Jasper lowered his. Willow Rides Thunder lowered her Springfield. Vance came around the back with his scattergun. Absalom said again, louder, "For the town below the ridge, and for the 12 years, and for the graves in the churchyard, and for every soul who had ever stood in this valley, knowing the truth and not being able to say it, he is done." Elk Basin heard. Elk Basin heard him clean. And Elk Basin did something that town had not done in 12 years. Elk Basin cheered, not loud, not celebratory. The low, ragged cheer of people who had been afraid for a long time, who had at last been given permission to stop being afraid. Bells started ringing at the Methodist church. The pastor was pulling the rope. He was crying while he pulled the rope. He would not remember later who had told him to ring the bells. He would only remember that he had known. Wilhelmina Fairfax sat in the buggy at the gate, her small hands still in Evangeline's small hands. She said, "Well, I'll be." Evangeline said, "Aunt Wilhelmina." "Yes, child? It is finished." "No, my dear. It is only just beginning." The grave. The Elk Basin Methodist churchyard. The day after Kingsley's death. A cold, clear November morning. Absalom Youngblood walked with Evangeline Ridgway between the pine boxes and the small white stones, past the graves of Ephraim Youngblood, past the grave of Josiah Fairfax, past the small stones of children lost to fevers, past the graves of settlers. Absalom had known all his life. To the west side of the churchyard, under a tall lodgepole pine, a view. Absalom stopped. He pointed. "There, ma'am." Evangeline looked. 4 graves in a row. Simple stones, hand-carved, Absalom's own work. Sergeant Hollis Copperfield, 1836, 1876, a good man, CPO. Wendell Overholt, 1841, 1876, a good man, Pod. Rufus Wolfsbane, 1857, 1876. He baked us biscuits. We loved him. And the 4th stone, larger, set slightly forward. Cole Bartram Ridgway, 1919, 1876. He chose to go knowing. He rests under a pine that has a view. Evangeline stood in front of that stone. She did not cry. She had cried already. In Willow Rides Thunder's arms. Now she only stood. She looked at the stone. She looked at the view, down the valley. Golden meadow, blue mountains, the whole of the sawtooth in the winter sun. She said, "Papa, it is a very fine view." She knelt. She put her hand on the earth. She said, "Papa, I have come. I found the man who did it. He is dead by his own hand. The grant will be filed within the week. I am safe. I am loved. I am home. You may rest. Papa, I will bring you flowers in the spring, every spring, as long as I live. And when my daughters come, they will bring flowers. And when their daughters come, because you will not be forgotten. Papa, not for one day, not for 100 years. I promise you. She stood up. She looked at Absalom. She said, Absalom, ma'am, thank you. Ma'am, I made you a promise on my porch. I have only kept it now. You have kept more than one promise on that porch. Captain Youngblood. Ma'am. He looked at her. He said, Evangeline. Yes, I am not much of a talker. I have noticed. I have something to say, and I do not know how to say it fancy. I do not require fancy. Absalom. Ma'am. He drew breath. He said, I love my wife Cordelia. 8 years she has been in the ground. I did not think I could love a woman again. I did not think there was room in a man for two of them. I was wrong. I have been wrong about a lot of things in my life, and I have never once been so glad to have been wrong. I am 42 years old. I have a house full of brothers and a scar on my jaw and a limp in my left knee when the weather turns and a bad dream. I still have some nights that I do not think will ever entirely leave me. I have gray in my hair. I ain't a young man. I ain't a rich man. I ain't a smooth man. But I would like to spend the rest of my days walking beside you if you will have me. That is all. That is the shape of it. That is what I got to offer you. She did not answer for a long moment. The wind moved in the pines above the graves. Somewhere a raven called. She said, Absalom Youngblood. Ma'am, I did not travel 2,000 miles for a young man. Ma'am, I did not travel 2,000 miles for a rich man. Ma'am, I did not travel 2,000 miles for a smooth man. Ma'am, I traveled 2,000 miles because a young man forged an old letter in his elder brother's hand for a reason he could not fully explain to himself. I traveled 2,000 miles because my father, God rest him, wrote in a book on a cold field morning that his best young officer would carry his daughter if the daughter had need of a carrying. I traveled 2,000 miles. Absalom, because the Lord walks his people home by roads none of them can see coming. And I have arrived. I have arrived. Sir, I have been arrived for 11 days. I only had to wait for you to know it too. He said, Ma'am, is that a yes? She said quiet, yes. Absalom, that is a yes. He knelt. I was 42. His left knee did not thank him. He knelt anyway. He took her small hand. He said, Then, Miss Evangeline Ridgway of Boston, Massachusetts, will you do me the very great honor of becoming Mrs. Absalom Youngblood of Elk Basin, Idaho Territory, in the spring, in the church yonder, with every soul in this valley in attendance, and your father's grave 12 yards off, where he can watch. She said, I will. He rose. He did not kiss her. Not yet. Not standing over the graves. That was for another day. That was for the church. I put her small hand through the crook of his arm. They walked back toward the buggy. Wilhelmina was waiting. She took one look at their faces. She said, Well, I do declare, it is about time. The trial. 10 days later. Boise. The federal courthouse. Judge Ridgefield on the bench. Sheriff Obadiah Vance in the witness stand. Under oath. Weeping. Telling the whole of it. Rattlesnake Ridge. The bribe. The 47 men his information had killed. The 12 years he had lived with it. The way his brother's false Denver arrest had come the very next month. The way Kingsley had used it to keep him bought. The way the pardon Absalom had produced in his own yard had turned out to be true, because Wilhelmina Fairfax had, through a chain of favors going back to a Rhode Island lawyer she had grown up with and a territorial secretary who owed a favor from 1859, actually secured that pardon 2 months back. Waiting. Because Wilhelmina Fairfax played chess. She had been playing chess with Zephaniah Kingsley for 12 years, and he had not once noticed. Sheriff Vance was sentenced to 15 years at hard labor. Not 30, because the judge accounted for his testimony, because the judge accounted for his willingness to say it aloud. Because in the American West of 1878, the difference between a hanging and 15 years was the difference between a coward who ran and a coward who at last stood up. Absalom Youngblood shook the sheriff's hand at the courthouse steps before they took him away. He said, "Vance, you will get out. You will be an old man, but you will get out. Come find me. There is a chair at my table." Vance could not speak. He nodded. They took him. The Elk Basin Homestead Grant of 1866 was filed under federal reclamation on the 11th day of November. In the year of our Lord 1878, 4 days ahead of the deadline, 23 founding families reclaimed their land. 6 were still living. 17 had passed and their descendants had to be found. The Youngblood parcel, 1,200 acres of high timber and meadow along the Sawtooth Basin, was restored to Absalom Youngblood, Merrick Youngblood, Ferdinand Youngblood, and Jasper Youngblood, in equal share, held in perpetuity for the Youngblood name. The Ridgeway parcel, 1,400 acres, including 3 seams of silver ore that Kingsley had been quietly working for 9 years without paying a dollar of royalty, was restored to Evangeline Ridgeway, sole living heir of Colonel Bartram Ridgeway. The Fairfax parcel, a smaller holding, but including the very land the Methodist Church stood on, was restored to Wilhelmina Fairfax, sole surviving spouse of the Reverend Josiah Fairfax. The mine was not razed. The mine kept working, because a mine that has fed 40 families in a small town for 9 years cannot simply be closed without those 40 families going hungry. The mine was reorganized under a cooperative charter, every miner a shareholder, every child of every miner set to receive a scholarship to the Elk Basin School when they came of age. Because Evangeline Ridgeway had ideas, she had brought some of them with her from Boston. She had made up others on the train home from Boise. She was, as it turned out, her father's daughter, which had been the whole point of Colonel Bartram Ridgeway raising a daughter in the first place. The winter came hard to the Sawtooth. Snow deep on the meadow by the 1st of December. The cabin was warm. Every night the stove ticked and the lamp burned and the wind moved and the pines outside made their slow, patient conversation and the coyotes called on the far ridge, and Absalom Youngblood slept a whole night through, for the first time since a rain-soaked border pass in the summer of '76. Evangeline slept in Wilhelmina's spare room at the parsonage in town. Because it would not be seemly, said Wilhelmina, until the wedding, because Wilhelmina was Methodist. Because a Boston girl who was fixin' to be the wife of a Youngblood was going to be married proper, or Wilhelmina would know the reason. The wedding was set for the 15th of May, Pentecost Sunday, because Wilhelmina had a sense of occasion. The winter passed in visiting. Absalom drove down to the parsonage in his sleigh on Thursday afternoons. He took coffee with Wilhelmina and Evangeline. He said little. He listened much. He walked Evangeline the length of the church graveyard when the weather allowed. She read to him from her mother's Bible. He read to her from Colonel Ridgeway's field journal, slowly, one entry at a time, because there was no rush anymore. Sunday dinners at the cabin. Willow Ride's Thunder came sometimes with her mother, an old woman named Beside the River Where Cranes Fly, who had known Ephraim Youngblood in her girlhood, and who told stories at the Youngblood table that made Merrick laugh so hard he choked on his stew twice in one evening. Ferdinand courted a widow named Rosewood, who lived in a small cabin down the valley. He rode down to see her every Saturday. He rode home whistling. Merrick did not court anyone. He said his books were sufficient company. Nobody in the family entirely believed him, but nobody in the family pressed the matter. Jasper began writing. Actual writing. At the little desk in the parlor. Not letters this time. Stories. About the mountains. About the valley. About the 15 dead men in the yard and the 11 minutes that had been the making of him. He read the first story aloud one Sunday evening. He was terrible at reading aloud. His voice shook. But when he was done, Absalom put his hand on his youngest brother's shoulder and said, "Little brother, that is a real thing. You keep writing them. You are fixin' to be a man who tells the truth of this country. That is a work worth doing." Jasper cried a little. Only Evangeline saw. She did not remark on it. She only reached over and squeezed his hand once, hard, and let go. Ledger Everhart got his own horse in December, a gift from the Ridgeway estate. The Ridgeway estate being now, technically, Evangeline, which meant Evangeline had given him the horse. He was 19 years old. He had never owned a horse. He wept over it in the barn in a way he did not want anyone to see. His mother, Bethany Everhart, took the position of housekeeper at the Fairfax parsonage. She was 50 years old. She had been in the Elk Basin jail on a false charge for 6 months. She was a very good housekeeper. She was also a very good cook. The parsonage smelled of yeast bread every day now. Wilhelmina put on 4 pounds and did not care. Pentecost Sunday, 1879, the 15th of May. The Methodist Church of Elk Basin was full, 149 souls in a building built for 80. Standing in the aisles, sitting on window ledges, children on their parents' laps. Willow rides Thunder and her mother and 11 of her people in the front pew on the left. Sheriff Ashford, who had come up from Boise to take Vance's old post, and who was already becoming a very good sheriff in the front pew on the right with his wife. Ledger Everhart, in a new suit he had never worn, holding the ring on a blue velvet cushion because Evangeline had asked him to. Merrick as best man on the right, Ferdinand and Jasper as groomsmen behind Merrick, because the elder brother had 3 brothers, because a man does not choose between his brothers. Absalom Youngblood at the altar, in a black wool suit Wilhelmina had made him buy in Boise, his beard trimmed, his gray hair combed back, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes on the door, because Evangeline was coming. The doors opened. The pastor's wife played the small parlor organ Wilhelmina had donated to the church 3 years back after Josiah's death. Evangeline Ridgway came down the aisle on the arm of Jasper Youngblood, because Ferdinand had said, 3 weeks before, at Sunday dinner, without warning, "Ma'am, if it is not presumptuous, since your father cannot walk you in, would you consider Jasper? He is the one whose letter brought you. I reckon he is the one who ought to hand you off." Evangeline had looked at Ferdinand, then at Jasper, then at Absalom. Absalom had smiled small and quiet and had said, "Ma'am, I think it is a fine notion. If it suits you," she had said, "it suits me perfectly." So on Pentecost Sunday, 1879, Jasper Youngblood, 29 years old, walked Evangeline Ridgway down the aisle of the Elk Basin Methodist Church. She wore a dress the color of cream. Wilhelmina had made it. Wilhelmina had also made the veil, though the veil had come out of a trunk in the parsonage attic that had contained Wilhelmina's own wedding veil from 1844, which she had washed and pressed and altered by her own hand over 3 winter evenings by lamplight, because she had said, "Child, it is time this veil had another day out." Evangeline carried a small bouquet, wild larkspur, the blue kind, the kind that grew above the Youngblood cabin, the kind Jasper had once pressed and put in a drawer beside a draft of a letter. The pastor spoke. He read from 1 Corinthians 13. He said the old words. The Youngblood brothers, all 4 of them, said their vows in order at Absalom's request. Absalom first, to Evangeline, then Merrick, promising to be a brother, then Ferdinand, promising to be a brother, then Jasper, promising to be a brother. Because Evangeline was not just marrying a man, she was marrying into a family, and the family wanted her to hear it out loud. Evangeline said her vows in a voice that carried clean to the back pew. Absalom said his in a voice that only carried to the second row. Because Absalom Youngblood, 42 years old, had a lump in his throat that he could not chase down for love or money. The pastor said the words. The pastor said, "You may kiss the bride." Absalom Youngblood kissed his wife. Very slow, very careful, very sure. The church erupted, not into applause. Applause was not Methodist. Into a soft, joyful sound that was mostly the sound of 149 people breathing out at once. Wilhelmina Fairfax cried. She had said she would not. She cried anyway. The reception was in the Youngblood yard. Trestle tables set up between the cabin and the barn. The smokehouse had been rebuilt, bigger than before, by Ferdinand and Merrick and Ledger and 3 Shoshone carpenters over the winter. There was venison, there was elk. There was 5 kinds of pie. There was cider from the rosewood orchard down the valley. There was music. Jasper played a fiddle nobody in the family had known he could play. Turned out Jasper had been practicing all winter in the barn. Turned out he was quite good. He played Shall We Gather at the River. He played Wayfaring Stranger. He played a Scottish tune Willow Rides Thunder's mother had taught him because she had wanted to dance to it one more time in her life. She danced. 63 years old. Slow, careful, beautiful. Everyone stopped to watch. She wept softly at the end. She said something to Willow in her own language. Willow said quietly to Evangeline, "My mother says she has not danced to that tune since her wedding day in 1841. She says she has been waiting a long time for someone to play it in this valley. She says thank you." Evangeline could not answer. She only nodded. At sundown, guests began to leave. The valley emptied slow. By dusk, only the family was left. The four brothers, their wife, Wilhelmina, Willow and her mother, who were staying the night, Ledger and his mother, Sheriff Ashford and his wife, who were staying the night too because the road down was long. They sat on the porch, the sun going down behind the ridge, gold on the meadow, the stove inside ticking as it cooled, coffee going around. Wilhelmina raised her cup. She said, "To Colonel Bartram Ridgway of the Idaho Territorial Volunteers, may he rest under his pine tonight and know his daughter is home." Every cup raised. Every voice said, "To the Colonel." Wilhelmina raised her cup again. She said, "To the Reverend Josiah Fairfax of Elk Basin Methodist, who signed his name to a piece of paper 12 years ago because he was a man who did what was right no matter the cost. May he rest in the arms of his Savior tonight and know his patience has been rewarded." Every cup, every voice. "To the Reverend." Wilhelmina raised her cup a third time. She said, "To Ephraim Youngblood, who raised 4 sons in this cabin and taught them all to be men worth the name. And to Cordelia Youngblood, may she rest, whose place at her husband's side has been taken up by a woman she would have loved." Every cup, every voice. Absalom's voice a beat behind the others. "To Ephraim, to Cordelia." Then Wilhelmina looked at Evangeline. She said, "Now, child, your turn." Evangeline stood. She lifted her cup. She looked around the porch, at Merrick, at Ferdinand, at Jasper, at Wilhelmina, at Willow and her mother, at Ledger and Bethany, at the sheriff and his wife, at her husband. She said, "To this house, which has taken me in, to the 4 brothers who guard it, to the woman who made my wedding veil, to the men who came up the mountain when we called, to the Lord who walks his people home by roads none of us can see coming, and to the man who dug my father's grave under a pine that has a view. May we sit at this porch for many long years. May we welcome many strangers. May we send none of them away hungry. May our home be their home. May our peace be their peace. Amen." Every cup, every voice. Amen. The sun went down behind the Sawtooth Ridge. The first star came out over the eastern pines. And Absalom Youngblood, 43 years old, sat on the porch of the cabin his father had built with his young wife beside him and his 3 brothers around him, and the good gray widow at the head of the table, and a fiddle waiting on the bench for Jasper to pick it up again. And he was, for the first time in a great many years, home, truly home, not waiting on a dream, not carrying a weight, not standing above a grave. Home. And the wind came down off the Sawtooth Ridge, and the pines moved in it, and a coyote called on the far ridge and another one answered. And Wilhelmina Fairfax reached out her small, strong hand and patted the back of Evangeline's hand and said, "Child, welcome home." Evangeline said, "Yes, Aunt Wilhelmina, I am home." She was at last, home. And in a small grave in a small churchyard, 12 yards from a Methodist steeple under a lodgepole pine that had a view of the whole Sawtooth Basin, a colonel of Idaho Territorial Volunteers rested in the ground, and the wind moved through the pine above him. And it might have been the wind, or it might have been the pine, or it might have been the Lord himself. But somewhere, in the settled evening of a spring day in the Sawtooth country in the year of our Lord, 1879, a voice that Absalom Youngblood had not heard in nearly 3 years said, very quiet, in his ear, "Well done, son. You carried her home." And Absalom Youngblood, on the porch of his own cabin with his own wife's hand in his own hand, Absalom Youngblood closed his eyes. He said so quiet only he heard it, "Yes, sir." Colonel, I did my best. And the star above the pines burned steady, and the coyote called, and the fiddle waited on the bench, and the cabin, warm behind them, held everyone it needed to hold. And the door was open, and the door would stay open, for anyone who came up the mountain, for as many years as the young blood brothers stood, because that was the shape of it. That was the whole